It's been said that what happens to the Panama Canal happens to the world. The Panama Canal handles 5% of global trade. About 14,000 ships pass through every year. In 2019, the canal earned $2.6 billion in fees for getting those ships from one ocean to another. And none of it is possible without railroad technology, without steel wheel on steel rail. Pentrex is proud to present the Mules of the Panama Canal.
The pilot will not actually be manning the controls. That's what the captain's there for.
We begin our look at the Mules of the Panama Canal in the middle of Gatun Lake on a boat. As you'll see, a boat is a great way to see the locomotives at work. As we travel the man-made lake on our way to the Miraflores Lock, let's look at just a bit of the history of the canal. The canal is a feat of modern engineering, from the construction of the canal to the lock chambers that lift the vessels above sea level and lower them on the other side. Joining the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the Panama Canal is one of the two great man-made shipping shortcuts in the world, the other being the Suez Canal between the Mediterranean and Red Seas. Before the construction, any ships that were crossing between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean had to travel around Cape Horn, or the southernmost tip of South America. This journey took 67 days and passed through hazardous waters. The only way to shorten this journey for ships was to cut an artificial waterway or canal through the isthmus connecting North and South America.
Red flag on the map.
This is the new Centennial Bridge. It carries the Pan American Highway across the canal.
So they're going to merge again with the north and western on this level. Starting after we pass from the
Just before we transit our first lock, we again see the Centennial Bridge.
Every time they have lowered the level of the water in the sea, they have to let 26 inches down of the water go out to the ocean. So whenever they can, the canal will put more than one vessel in at the same time to save water.
This is a boat-eye view of the Pedro Miguel Lock and our first look at a mule. The Pedro Miguel Lock is a single-chamber lock.
It'll have the name of the ship on it, the Pacific Queen. It reaches the port. Cost of the certificate is only $10. Now it looks like it's going to be raining farther ahead, so I don't know if we're going to be able to do this once we clear this lock. So while it's still dry mulas, como se les dice aquí. Ellas se conectan con cables de acero, ¿no? That will start steering the vessel, lining it up with the center wall, which is longer. It'll give them enough room to...
A ship approaching the locks first pulls up to the guide wall, which is an extension of the center wall of the locks, where it is taken under control by the mules on the wall before proceeding into the lock. As it moves forward, additional lines are taken to mules on the other wall. With large ships, there are 2 mules on each side of the bow, and 2 each side at the stern, 8 in total, allowing for precise control of the ship.
Culverts 18 feet in diameter that run the length of the structure from all the way behind us in the highest end, all the way ahead of us to the lowest end. Behind us and ahead of us. They open and close like guillotine valves, and they are shut off behind us as the gates are. No more water comes out and spilling at the other side of the gates in front of us, lowering the level in here by 32 feet. Communicating vessels do all the work. The canal has about moving 0.6 million gallons of fresh water in just 8 minutes. 32 feet and is clearing the lock, guided by the electrical. Next photo being called for bunch of yellow. This lake we're coming into right now. So it's going to be located behind the north side, near the shore right side. In between the ones that have already been repaired, the back one and the one that's being worked on right now. Porque está allá al fondo cortado en terraza. Llevar la casa de ustedes, no hay que les garantizo que a cualquier que vive en 1900. And why home will be one of the best out there. Gives you exactly detailed information about the surrounding area of the Panama Canal. Las aves han hecho de este su lugar predilecto para la captura de alimentos at Miraflores Locks. Once we clear here, we're going to be on the Pacific Ocean. So we're going to drop. And we're going to 8 years, we're going to, remember, we have some fresh water since we started. All the water comes from the highest end. They have to follow us on the chamber is the only chamber where you can salt water and fresh water. And the water accounts for the fact that you will traditionally see a lot of birds flying around the Panama Canal. For the birds, leading to the Panama Canal Lock, this is the operate begin an open sea mark available every day of the year. They'll just hang around this place every day all day long on the sidewalk. They'll be coming out from the right-hand side wall.
Next up is the Miraflores Lock. In the distance, we see the Bridge of the Americas. It used to carry the Pan American Highway over the canal. Before the construction of the canal, Scotland believed they could establish a colony in present-day Panama and provide for the transshipment of goods across the isthmus. Not a canal, but a system which would unload ships on one coast and transport the cargo by mule across the isthmus to be loaded onto another ship on the opposite coast. This effort failed in 1700 for a number of reasons, including the difficulties of the jungle and an armed response from the Spanish. It would be another 150 years before the dream would take hold again. In 1855, a railroad was opened across the isthmus, doing the work originally envisioned for the mules. While this helped commerce, it was not an all-weather route, nor was it economical, requiring a large workforce to unload and load ships on both coasts. During both canal construction efforts, the railroad was an important asset. This railroad, the Panama Canal Railway, still operates today and is partly owned by the Kansas City Southern. The locomotives of the Panama Canal Railway use a paint scheme identical to the Kansas City Southern, even with a similar logo. At the end of our program, we'll board the Panama Canal Railway. The dream continued to be a canal. In the late 1800s, the French attempted a canal. After 10 years of work, that effort failed. A caretaker workforce kept at construction and operated the railroad until the railroad and unfinished canal was sold to the United States in 1904. In 1914, the first ships passed through the lock and dam system. We see ships on their way into the locks and heading out of the canal to the Pacific Ocean. Back on dry land, we see the Bridge of the Americas again, and then settle in at the Miraflores Locks, where we have a great vantage point to actually watch the operation of these mules.
El agua fluye a través de un sistema de alcantarillas y túneles.
From the first lock system, it was considered an important safety feature that ships be guided through the lock chambers by electric locomotives running on towpaths on the lock walls. These mules are used for side-to-side and braking control in the locks, which are narrow relative to modern-day ships. Forward motion into and through the locks is actually provided by the ship's engines and not the mules. Once centered in the lock, it is very difficult to maneuver. A ship in the lock cannot simply back up and try again, so each ship must be guided firmly through the lock. This is where the unique Panama Canal mules come in. Each ship is connected by cable to between 4 and 6 mules. The minimum is 2 in the front or bow of the ship and 2 in the rear or stern. The cable tension and length is adjusted by an electric winch to hold the ship tight to each mule. As the ship moves, the mules run alongside on their own set of rails, keeping the ship centered in the lock. It's easy to assume that ships would have a relatively easy passage through the Panama Canal. They are moving slowly on calm water. What could possibly happen? However, it is challenging to navigate the Panama Canal, especially when the gates open while the vessel is in the lock. The sudden release of water creates what is called the hydraulic effect, which can propel the ship forward at a dangerous speed. The ship pilots are trained to handle the ship controls. Through the combination of careful navigation and the steady guidance of the locomotives, ships are able to hold a slow but steady pace when the gates are opened.
Puede que tengan mercancía seca. embarcación frente a nosotros. En este momento we have live action here inside the lock. We have the vessel in front of us, which is now it's entering to the upper chamber. Hacia la izquierda, hacia el Océano Pacífico. En horas
Grupo de Ecuador, Ivona, su guía Ricardo, estamos listos para partir. Grupo de Ecuador, su guía Ricardo.
bow and stern. This way they can keep the vessel in the center or middle of the chamber to avoid hitting the walls. Each cable has towing capacity of up to 35,000 pounds.
The first locomotives used in the canal were made by General Electric. Each locomotive weighed 43 metric tons and was able to handle about 12 tons of force at a speedy 2 miles an hour. Once they pulled the ship to the end of the lock system, they would return to their station at a rate of about 5 miles an hour. At one time, more than 100 of these mules operated on the canal lock system. They were Pacific Mules and Atlantic Mules. Though they both were built by GE, the two differed slightly in appearance. Each mule was just under 33 feet long, with a wheelbase of 12 feet. The locomotives had dual electrical and mechanical controls, permitting operation from either end. Later generations of mules used one operator cabin centered on the locomotive. Only 3 of first-generation mules survive. 2 are in Panama, and the third is at the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke.
última generación pueden ir hasta 10 millas por hora, ya que tienen aire acondicionado. Cada unidad tiene un costo de 2.1 millones de dólares. El canal tiene 100 en total. Panama Canal since 1999. These locomotives were built in Tokyo, Japan by Mitsubishi Kawasaki. They weigh about 50 tons each unit. They have two motors, each one of 290 horsepower. They are very fast. They can return from one point to the other in about 10 miles per hour. The average cost per unit is $2.1 million. The Panama Canal has 100 of these locomotives. Oh, and also the operator from each locomotive is very comfortable now, since each cabin has air conditioning. Bueno, ya prácticamente el local operation consists of transferring water from one chamber to the other, from the upper chamber to the lower chamber. El agua se va a transferir por debajo de la escusa, utilizando alcantarillado o túneles. Water will be transferred using tunnels underneath the lock. Over el 15 de agosto de 1900, el canal ha tenido más de 1 millón de tránsitos. Panama Canal opened its doors August 17.
Because the route over the mountainous spine in Panama means a canal above sea level, the lock system has always been the limiting factor for ship size. The locks are water elevators. When a ship sails into the first chamber, the lower gate is closed and water flows in. This raises the ship until it reaches the same level as the water in the second chamber. Then the upper gate is opened and the ship can travel through. This process is repeated several times until the ship reaches the last lock chamber. There, the water is drained until it reaches sea level. Then the water is drained off and the final gate is opened, so the ship can resume its ocean journey.
If it is necessary, using each walkie-talkie radio, our Panama Canal of the locomotives, faces to the lock chamber. You can see the bell. Los operadores de locomotoras responden al tráfico del canal sonando sus campanas. Pueden apreciar que en la cabina, en el centro de la locomotora, ahí está la campana. These bells apply in the People's Republic of China, but anyhow, we didn't modify many flags, roads are short to depart. Remember, your original ship, Great Reefer, are two Panama Canal items. Asignado a Great Reefer, asignado de tugboats, Reefer Locks, is one of our oldest tugboats, assigned to the Southeast River Sur. Las esclusas o el canal de Panamá tiene un total de 12 cámaras de derecho.
Los barcos más grandes que pueden utilizar las esclusas son 294 metros de largo por 32.2 metros de manga.
Su atención, por favor, su atención.
Los Miraflores, utilizando su propia motora, la embarcación empieza a salir de la cámara superior. I return back. I need to change battery right.
In 1964, the Panama Canal upgraded its locomotives. The GEs were replaced with Mitsubishi locomotives, which were bigger and more powerful. Each unit weighed 55 tons and could handle 33 tons of force, almost triple the capacity of the original Mules. Speed along the canal was doubled. In 1997, the Panama Canal Commission awarded Mitsubishi a $54 million contract to develop and produce a new generation of locomotives that were lighter and more energy efficient. This first contract included 26 locomotives, upgrades to the facilities, and training for canal personnel. Over time, the Canal Commission purchased 100 of these third-generation mules to fully replace the second-generation mules. The new units weigh 50 tons and are equipped with two 290-horsepower traction motors. Each locomotive cost about $2.3 million, but reduced time in the lock and are more energy efficient. The Panama Canal Commission has since replaced and expanded its fleet and ordered additional mules.
Right now, the vessel is guided by our powerful electric power locomotives. En estos momentos, el barco está siendo guiado por las potentes locomotoras eléctricas de remolque. The main function of the locomotive is to keep the vessel in the middle of the lane. La principal función es detenida, o sea que trabaja como freno. Now, we are charging to the ship $72 per container of 20 feet. Those containers of 40 feet, obviously, they face down.
According to the Panama Canal Commission, the Panama Canal Mule upgrade was an urgent need because of the increase in size, weight, and number of vessels passing through the canal. Some of the ships need as many as 8 locomotives to guide them through the lock chambers. As for why these locomotives are called mules, urban legend has it that the name is a tribute to the animals that were used by other canals to pull the smaller boats along a towpath. However, even from the first days, the ships traversing the Panama Canal were too large for animal power. So it may be a tribute to the beasts of burden at earlier lock systems, or to the many mules that worked and died in the first effort to build the canal. In any case, it is the perfect moniker for a locomotive that handles the kind of weight these little locomotives handle. It is certainly a colorful throwback to the role strong, loyal, and hard-working animals played in early shipping and trade.
Each locomotive has 2 wires, those wires stop in the ship, and we are using, that vessel is using a total of 12 wires. That means that the vessel is paying an extra of $3,600. Al monto que acabo de mencionarle hay que agregarle $300 por cada cable de locomotora. Pudieron apreciar cómo las locomotoras estaban ayudando la nave a ser detenida. Hay 6 locomotoras. Cada locomotora tiene 2 cables, por lo que el barco tiene asignado un total de 12 cables, así que va por. That means that the vessel is going to pay an additional 8.
Está pasando rápidamente por gigantescos túneles. Dentro de la vía acuática en los océanos se encuentran al mismo nivel. El canal está construido sobre la que está a nuestra mano derecha, cerca de la montaña.
2 newer locks have been built. They are called the Neo-Panamax locks and are 180 feet wide. Ships built to take advantage of this increased lock size are called Neo-Panamax ships and can be 176 feet wide, leaving just 2 feet of clearance on either side of the ship as it traverses the lock. Both sets of locks, the second set of locks and the Neo-Panamax locks and channels, are in use today. Both sets of locks have extremely tight clearances, and that's why the mules are needed. For these Neo-Panamax freighters, there is literally no room for error. Once in the lock, they cannot drift away from the center. A side swipe of the lock walls could damage the lock, the ship, or a mule. The cogged track, the tow track as it is called, has been recently upgraded with just over 9 miles of a new, stronger and more durable track. The upgrade was needed as the stronger mules pull and guide even larger ships. Some of the function of the locomotives are now being replaced at the larger, newer Neo-Panamax locks by tugboats.
As I mentioned before, the canal is not a level canal. It's a gigantic aquatic bridge that passes through the mountain range. All vessels must be raised at the entrance of the waterway, then sail the artificial lakes that are higher than the oceans. Finally, all vessels must be lowered at the exit, and this is due to the topography of the isthmus. Ocean levels are the same all over. Es importante mencionar que el canal divide al país en el sector este y oeste. Al frente
Damas y caballeros, muy buenas tardes. Las personas, presentación del video en español. De contenedores que ya hemos bajado los primeros 8 metros. La embarcación va a pasar a la cámara inferior, donde será bajada 8 metros más. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, you can see this container cargo vessel, which already went down the first 27 feet. The vessel is moving into the lower launch chamber, and at this lower launch chamber, she will go down the last 27 feet. En cada lado del barco van a ver a las locomotoras eléctricas o mulas que lo guían, lo mantienen en el centro. Cada locomotora pesa 50 toneladas, operan con 2 motores de 290 caballos de fuerza. Son eléctricas, utilizan 480 voltios Cada locomotora trabaja con dos cables. Cada cable tiene capacidad para unos 17,000 kilos. Cuando ellas llegan al Canal de Panamá, en 1999, el costo por unidad fue de $2,300,000. Ellas son diseñadas para el Canal de Panamá. No existen en ninguna otra parte del mundo, solo aquí en el canal. Each locomotive weighs 50 tons. They work with two motors of 290 horsepower. They use electricity 480 volts. Each locomotive works with two cables, and each cable has capacity for 35,000 pounds. When they came to the Panama Canal, the price per unit was $2.3 million. They're specially designed and built for the Panama Canal's operation.
The mules themselves run on cogged or rack tracks with broad gauge, 5 feet. Motive power is electric, supplied through a third rail laid on the opposite side of the tracks to the ships. Each mule has a powerful winch controlled by the locomotive operator. These are used to cinch up the connected cables to keep the ship centered in the lock while moving it from chamber to chamber. With as little as 2 feet of clearance on each side of a ship, considerable skill is required on the part of the operators. Here we can clearly see the cogged track system. Because of the cost of operating a ship and the cost of Panama Canal tolls, shipping companies prefer to send larger ships that are filled to full capacity rather than smaller ships that can freely pass through the canal with a wide and generous berth on both sides.
que ustedes pueden apreciar que tiene dentro de los Dale, suave, hermano, suave. You heard the bell rung from the operator of the locomotive. That's the way to acknowledge to the pilot. They heard the instructions. There we go. Release tension on the cables. Now the coil in once again. You see how little ship for a crew member and on board. That's how we say it. One at a time, alright? Now let's take trip. Bueno, vamos a ir a parte de la tripulación. Esta embarcación hoy tiene un poquito más de coil.
These electric locomotives are specially designed to withstand the forces created by a full-sized cargo ship while traveling up steep inclines or maneuvering on vertical and horizontal curves. They don't pull or propel the ship forward. Instead, they prevent it from drifting off-center. The tension in the cables hold the ship at the correct position, centered and moving straight ahead. The mules may provide some assistance in moving the ship, but most of the work is done by the ship's propeller. The canal's narrowest spots are the individual locks. These are the second set of locks. They replaced the original locks in the 1930s. Before we leave Panama, let's climb on board a tourist train operated by the Panama Canal Railway. The sights include the canal and the lush scenery of Panama. We board our train on the Pacific side at the Corozal passenger station. Our destination is the Caribbean side of the city of Colón at appropriately named Atlantic Station. Our train is operated by a former Amtrak F40PH locomotive. The Panama Canal Railway's locomotive fleet changes over time, but is unique in that the core of its power are 10 former Amtrak F40PHs. These locomotives supply head-end power for not only passenger trains, but refrigerated containers. 5 EMD ST60s and 2 EMD ST40-2s from the Kansas City Southern pull container trains. 1 GP10 is used primarily for work trains. What we see that looks very much like supports for a modern electrified railroad are actually local transmission lines. There has been talk on and off through the years about electrifying the railroad, but nothing has yet come of the talk. This is the bridge over the Chagres River. Later, we'll be crossing the Gatun River. This is the Miraflores Tunnel, about a third of the way between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. The main line of the Panama Canal Railway opened to traffic in 1855. It was called an interoceanic railroad. Some declared it as a transcontinental railroad, despite traversing only the narrow isthmus connecting the North and South American continents. I suppose there's an argument to be made here. The railroad does join the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and it does cross the continental divide. In the late 1990s, a major rebuild of the entire line was undertaken by the KCS and partners. Until this rebuild, the main line of the Panama Canal Railway used the broad 5-foot gauge. The entire line is now standard gauge. Among the many improvements was the replacement of all wooden ties with concrete ties. The concrete will survive the jungle weather and insects much better than even treated wood ties. Although primarily a freight railroad, this newly improved Panama Canal Railway does offer passenger service. One passenger service per direction is offered every Monday to Friday. It takes about an hour to traverse the entire line. While the passenger service is primarily for local workers and commuters, the service has become popular with tourists. The railroad has a fleet of several historic passenger cars in service, including number 102, which is a fluted dome car built by the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1955. Standard passenger coaches are built by the Bud Company and leased from Amtrak. now get some good views of the canal, its lake feeder system, and Gatun Lake. Notice the maintenance of way equipment on the siding. The Panama Canal Railway only has 48 miles to maintain, but it maintains those miles well. You may see the railroad's reporting marks, PCRC, on some of the equipment. As we pull into Atlantic Station in Cologne, we head off the train and end our Panama adventure.